Fascism, Nazism, and Antifa then and now. Let's talk about it because, man, I tell you, there's some huge misunderstandings. Now, history is messy, but if we don't understand it, we risk repeating it. You've heard it. Those who fail to learn from history are destined to repeat it. Well, today I want to talk about three words. These are three words that people throw around constantly, often and usually as insults: fascism, Nazism, and of course, Antifa. And we're going to look at what they actually were when they started and how they progressed. Then we're going to compare their DNA with movements and policies in our own time. And I'm doing this because on the other Antifa videos I've done, I see that people jump to conclusions as they try to compare, well, what they failed to learn in school with what the anecdotes happen to be that certain people on the left are trying to put into the modern day vernacular. Yeah. So let's compare the DNA with movements and policies in our time on those terms that we're going to explore. Now, because here's the truth. Authoritarianism doesn't always come wearing jackboots and waving flags. Sometimes it comes smiling, disguised as safety, tolerance, or democracy. Kind of like Gavin Newsom looks. And if we're not awake to it, we're going to miss the warning signs. So let's look at part one of this, the origins. Let's start with definitions. Fascism began in Italy in 1919. Mussolini's group was called the Fascist Italian whatever, the Italians. So let's just call them the fascists, right? Save me from learning Italian. And by 1922, he had marched on Rome and taken power. And fascism exalted the state above the individual. In other words, the state's more important than the individuals are. And they demanded loyalty and fused government with corporations to direct all of society. Now, Nazism emerged later. It emerged in Germany a little later. Hitler took over the National Socialist German Workers' Party in the 1920s, and it shared fascism's methods: one-party rule, propaganda, suppression of dissent, but added something much, much darker: racial supremacy, antisemitism, and eventually genocide. And by 1933, Hitler was in power, and by the end of the decade, Europe was on fire. It was burning. And Antifa started in 1932, not as a broad movement of Democrats, but as the militant wing of the German Communist Party. They fought Nazis, yes, but they also fought the modern Weimar government, calling them social fascist. And Antifa's goal, folks, wasn't freedom. It was a communist revolution, much like what we see today. So already you see a pattern: fascists, Nazis, Antifa. They all fought rivals, but none of them were fighting for true liberty. And just as a side note, I've had people make really snide comments on TikTok as I've talked about this, asking me what side of World War II my father happened to be on. Well, he fought in the Korean War. He was in Korea, not in World War II, but he would have been fighting the Nazis and the fascists, meaning Italy and Germany, and so on. So I don't need to defend him or my family. We want to look at the terms and how people snarkily try to show their cleverness by, conflating and distracting you. And that's okay. They can call me whatever they want. You watch me enough and you're going to know that I'm pro-freedom, pro-liberty, pro-United States, anti-Nazi, anti-fascist, and I am anti a few things, but I'm also pro. I'm pro-American. All right, but let's look at the evolution. Let's go back in time. After the war, fascism was discredited, but pieces of it survived. Nazism was destroyed militarily, but neo-Nazi movements, well, they lingered in shadows. Antifa, however, reemerged in the 1970s in Europe, then again in the United States decades later, and by the 2010s and 2020s, Antifa became a street presence. They were a slaughterous gang showing up at protest riots and college campuses, any place where they could get attention and destroy lives and destroy property. But let's be clear. Antifa today isn't battling Hitler's stormtroopers. No. They redefine fascist so broadly that the new definition means anyone that they don't like. And that would be conservatives, Christians, Jews, Zionists, and classical liberals. And remember, classical liberals are not the same as liberals today. Not by far. Way, way, way different. They've kept the violence and intimidation of their 1930s ancestors, Antifa, but not the enemies. That's historical amnesia. Now, the pillars of fascism then and now, we'll look at some of them. A suppression of speech is a big one. In Mussolini's Italy, opposition papers were shut down. In Hitler's Germany, radio and film were controlled by Goebbels' propaganda ministry. And what about today? We've seen attempts to form a disinformation governance board in the Department of Homeland Security. We've seen the Twitter files reveal that government agencies pressured platforms to silence stories before elections. California just passed Senate Bill 771, which would fine social media companies up to $1 million if they recklessly promote hateful or extremist speech. And who defines those terms? Of course, California and Gavin Newsom. And again, this is their response trying to embarrass Trump and all sorts of stuff. You want to know a real fascist, look at the government in California and look at Gavin Newsom. Not just a fascist, but a blatant lying scumbag. And I hate to say that, but new scum, as Trump had called him, is very, very appropriate. Anyway, the intent of California is clear. Government wants to decide what is true and punish platforms that allow the wrong voices to spread. Now, this should scare you. Mussolini also bragged, everything in the state, nothing outside the state. In other words, the state comes first. The state comes first, not any individuals, no individual rights, it's the state, which we see the United States had been moving toward, especially during the Biden administration. So in our own time, we have watched government dictate what speech was medical misinformation during COVID. Remember that? Silencing doctors who disagreed. Wow. California passed laws against so-called deep fakes in elections. A federal judge struck down one saying it was overly broad and likely unconstitutional, which seems to be half of what comes out of California. And again, the intent matters. Look, emergencies and vague threats are used to expand state control. In other words, never let a crisis go to waste. But let's also look at corporations and state and business fusion. That's what we saw with Mussolini's fascism. Mussolini's model wasn't socialism. He allowed private property, at least for a while, but demanded it serve the state. And today we see ESG and DEI mandates. They're pressuring corporations to adopt state-approved ideology. Very clear. We saw big tech companies censor stories after government nudges, or censor stories, after government nudges. And that is corporatism. When the state doesn't own the companies, but the companies serve the state's agenda anyway. Well, let's also look at suppression of opposition. In my mind, this is a big one. In fascist Italy and Nazi Germany, opposition parties were outlawed. Rivals were jailed, silenced, or worse. Now, what about today? Senator Chuck Grassley revealed that the FBI, after the 2020 election, scrutinized nearly 100 GOP-aligned groups or individuals, including Turning Point USA and the late Charlie Kirk. And the DOJ has rated pro-life activists under federal laws in ways critics say were selective and political. Now, the intent is unmistakable, folks. Treating political opponents not as citizens with different views, but as threats to be crushed. In fact, just look at Adam Schiffstein in the Senate as he interviews sometimes just average American citizens and brutalizes them, lies through his teeth. He's a fascist, folks, and I'll prove it later. Anyway, let's also look at propaganda and narrative control. Fascist regimes controlled every medium, newspapers, radio, films. Today we see government-backed fact-checkers fused into platforms. We see narratives pushed in the name of protecting democracy, but only when it comes to benefit one side. We saw Hillary Clinton come out really wanting to get rid of free speech. Same thing basically with Schumer and Schiff and Nancy Pelosi. They want to eliminate free speech because they want to control it, because if they can fully control your free speech, well, then they control the narrative and they control you, right? Yeah. But the intent is to monopolize the narrative, to decide which facts are safe and which must be erased. Now, in fascism, back in the 30s and 40s, religion subordinated to the state. Mussolini bullied the Vatican until it signed the Lateran Treaty. Hitler tried to create a German Christian movement under Nazi control, and it really wasn't Christianity. Today, the FBI was caught labeling radical traditionalist Catholics. And when I say today, I'm talking about modern times. They were caught labeling radical traditionalist Catholics as potential extremists, even suggesting infiltration of parishes. A House Judiciary Committee report said that there was no legitimate basis for it. Can you picture that? Biden's FBI, Comey's FBI, they sent infiltrators into Catholic churches to investigate them. Again, wanting to silence them. They've already tried to silence opposing opinions, say, to abortion. And yes, there's two sides, and that's not to the purpose of this particular video, but they're trying to silence speech. And they have been largely successful to some degree over the last few years, especially during the Biden administration. Now, Catholic hospitals and charities have been pressured to comply with mandates that violate their conscience. And the intent is the same. Religion is free only as long as it bows to the state. Now, they've also been scapegoating minorities, and let's see if I can put this together well enough so it's clear. The Nazis blamed Jews for every ill, much like I see from many people on TikTok today. They're going to blame Israel, they're going to blame the Jews for everything. Yeah. More results of our modern day anti-Semitic education system here in this country. Don't believe me, just look at Columbia University, Princeton, Yale, and many of the other schools. And we can go down into high schools and even grade schools. But today, folks, anti-Semitism is rising again on college campuses. Jewish students have been harassed, threatened, even barred from libraries, much like what took place under Hitler in the 1930s, as they tried to keep Jews out of schools. In fact, they passed laws to keep them out, etc. So who are the real Nazis and fascists today? Well, many of them are marching on college campuses calling Free Palestine. And I've got a lot of videos out on that particular topic as well. Free Palestine. Let me just translate that for you. Free Palestine means eradicate Israel, kill all the Jews. That's in Hamas's documents, founding documents, and that's really what it means. And many of these people that are marching on college campuses calling for that, they are paid by the opposition. Some have suggested somebody like George Soros, etc., because it creates chaos, and it's very anti-Semitic, and also incredibly unfortunate. So we saw that Jews back in Hitler's time, they were threatened, barred from libraries, and administrators looked away. Well, that reminds me of Yale and Harvard. Now, the Biden administration has often been slow, muted, or equivocal when Jewish students are targeted. In other words, they didn't do a damn thing. Now, they allowed it to continue, and the intent is dangerous, allowing Jews to become scapegoats while aggressively policing other kinds of speech. Interesting. That echo should chill you to the very bone. It should chill every heart that remembers the 1930s. And of course, most of those hearts have become still now. They're not alive for the most part. But we can look back and do an honest study of history, and you'll come to the same conclusions that I have come to, being a student of history and being very concerned about facts and truth, because much of what we see today ignores both of them. The only facts that matter today are the anecdotes that are presented by groups like the Democratic Party, the far left, the so-called progressive wing, which really should be called repressive wing. But anyway, let's look at conservatism. We see that Antifa today and people like Kamala Harris, people like AOC, they are calling conservatives and Republicans fascist. And if you let them get away with that, that means you're uneducated. That means that you are either ignorant or willfully ignorant and haven't studied the issues. And I know that sounds terribly condescending, but facts matter and words matter in the way we use them. And remember, I've told you repeatedly in other videos here and on TikTok and on Rumble and on YouTube, that's all three of you, that these labels that are put out are meant to stigmatize people who are afraid of having a label attached to them, and it silences them. And when speech is silenced in that way, well, then you've got bad people controlling the narrative. And we have seen that repeatedly. Now, some will say conservatives are the fascist. Let's test that theory, all right? Fascism worships state power. Absolutely true. Conservatism defeats and defends that idea, or defends the alternative. They defend limited government. They defeat the idea of state control. They defend limited government. That's not fascism. Fascism fuses businesses into state control. The state's going to control everything. We saw much of that during the Biden administration. Conservatism defends free markets. Fascism censors opposition. Conservatives champion the First Amendment. And some out there will say, oh, what about that guy recently that, I think his name was Jimmy Kimmel. He got taken off the air. First of all, he didn't get taken off the air for free speech. He got taken off the air for what I would call lies and hate speech, but he wasn't really taken off the air by the government. He was taken off the air by the markets because many of the stations, affiliate stations to his network, refused to run his crap because I guess they decided, if you're going to call yourself a comedian, you got to be funny. He's not funny. And he's really attacking conservatives for no reason other than that's his agenda. But anyway, he wasn't removed because of free speech. He was removed because the market forces saw that we don't want him. But conservatism does champion the First Amendment. I'm conservative. I'm all for the First Amendment. But you also have to understand the First Amendment. And I've got another video out on that. So we won't go into that today. But fascism, folks, also subordinates religion. That's right. The state above religion. And conservatism defends religious liberty. Fascism erases the individual for the collective. And that goes on constantly. The individuals aren't important unless we can pull them out and sort of use them in a way to, create an anecdote to mislead. It's part of the left's radical Hegelianism. And, conservatism defends personal responsibility and individual rights. The left, true fascists, they don't. They don't defend personal responsibility, and they don't defend individual rights. No, they want to do away with those. All the rights are vested in the state, not the individual. No, that's not what our founding documents say. Now, the record is clear. Conservatism is the opposite of fascism. But modern statism on the left, that's where the resemblance lies. Now, we also see that authoritarian systems, when we look at that, they always turn on faith. They're going to go after faith. They always come for the conscience. And that's why you work in a hospital, you will, regardless of your conscience, you will perform abortions. You will do this, or you will do that, or you will remove the genitals of little kids. Yeah. or you remove the breast buds of young girls. Those oftentimes are matters of conscience. And admittedly, some people in that field, hey, it's more a matter of money for them, more money in their pocket. They don't care about the conscience or ethics. But you see, also the rise of, say, antisemitism. It's not only political, it is spiritual. And the same hatred that drove pogroms and the Holocaust is surfacing again in our day, not by conservatives, but by the left wing, by that Antifa group, and to the Democratic Party. Now, Scripture tells us in Revelation that persecution of God's people is going to increase in the end times, before the very end. History warns us that liberty is fragile. Our loss of liberty is just a generation away. In fact, we almost lost it completely over the last 4 years. And once speech is controlled, now, I'm not saying speech should exist without consequences. Everything we say, we have consequences for. I have consequences for the things that I say. People will disagree with me. People will call me into question, and that's perfectly all right. Because what I'm saying right now isn't free speech unless I am addressing the government and redressing on the government. Then that gets into free speech based on the First Amendment. But we have normal everyday speech that you say something, there's going to be consequences. You know, you shout that you're super happy that Charlie Kirk is dead. Well, you may have consequences, and you should, because you're heartless. Anyway, history has warned us that liberty is fragile, and we need to protect it. And we must not look away. We must not look away. So, here's the truth. Fascism, Nazism, Antifa, none of them fought for freedom. And we in the United States fought against all three of them, more so the Nazism and the fascism, because Antifa was communist, and we have been in a battle with the communists for the most part over the last several decades. But World War II was primarily against the fascists and the Nazis and the horrible atrocities that they committed. All of those groups, including fascism, were authoritarian. And today, we see the same pillars: speech suppression, centralized power, corporatism, targeting of opponents, narrative control, subordination of religion, and rising anti-Semitism appearing again, dressed in modern-day clothes. So if you value truth, liberty, and faith, then you've got to resist the authoritarianism, whether it comes in black shirts, brown shirts, or in the smiling bureaucracy of modern politics, or that big slick-haired smile of Gavin Newsom. Now listen, let me tell you, I'm Stuart White. This channel is called Insight with Stuart White, dating back to my early radio days. And I want to thank you for watching. If you found this useful, share it. If you found this useful, then you should subscribe to this channel if you're on YouTube, or follow if you happen to be on Rumble. Set up whatever notifications you want, because we're going to have great content on this channel. And you're not going to want to miss any of it if you are interested in truth, if you're interested in facts. And if I come across facts that actually correct something I have said or a belief I've had, hey, I correct it. And I'll reveal it, because I want facts combined with what the real truth is. So let's keep speaking the truth while we still can, because there are groups out there that want to stop it. And they just stopped Charlie Kirk here a few days ago, and they're still trying to stop you. So like, follow, subscribe, do it all. We're going to have more. And thank you for joining me today. I'll talk to you later.